بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم كتاب الصيد والذبائح وما يؤكل من الحيوان. The book of hunting animals and sacrificing them for meat and that which may be eaten from the animals. First of all, when it comes to sacrificing animals for meat, then we need to know the conditions. And from the conditions is that the one sacrificing it must be eligible to do so. That is to say, he must be either a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian. Secondly, he needs to be aqil, somebody of sound mind, so it cannot be accepted from somebody who is insane, because the insane person does not have a niyyah, an intention. And when you're sacrificing, you need to have the intention that you're sacrificing in the name of Allah. Some scholars have said that you have to have the intention that you will eat the animal, because otherwise you are killing the animal for no valid purpose, and that is punishment worthy. And thirdly, the one offering the sacrifice needs to be mumayyiz, that is, reach the age of tamyiz. That is, he understands speech and can respond. So a little child, let's say at the age of 3 or 4, is not allowed to sacrifice animal for meat. Fourthly, when you sacrifice the animal, blood must flow. So if you strangle the animal to death or bludgeon it to death, then this meat cannot be eaten. And then fifthly, where you cut the animal needs to be in the proper place, that is, on the neck. So if it's the case that you just chop the animal right into two without actually cutting the neck to make the blood flow, then this meat cannot be eaten. Sixthly, the name of Allah Jalla wa Ala needs to be mentioned. If you forget to mention the name of Allah, then you're not sinful, but the meat cannot be eaten. One might say, but this is a complete waste. We say, yes, it's a complete waste. However, this waste is vital, because if you know that this meat will be wasted, then next time you will definitely remember. There is a weak hadith, ذَبِيحَةُ الْمُسْلِمْ حَلَالٌ وَإِنْ لَمْ يُسَمِّي. The sacrificed meat of a Muslim is halal even if he did not mention the name of Allah. The hadith is found in the Marasil of Abi Dawud. What about the ayah, رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا? Our Rabb, do not take us to account if we forget or just make an honest mistake. That is true. So the one who is sacrificing, he is not sinful. However, the one who's going to eat the meat will be sinful, because he's eating a meat upon which the name of Allah has not been mentioned. Allah Jalla wa Ala tells us, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا لَمْ يُذْكَرِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. Do not eat the meat which the name of Allah has not been pronounced over. As for if you send out the hunting animals, let's say a dog or perhaps an eagle, then it is a condition that you give it the order to go out. If it goes out on its own accord and it hunts, then this meat is not permissible to be eaten. If you give it the order and the dog eats from the meat which it hunts, then it has hunted for its own self and not for the owner. And so this meat again is not allowed to be eaten. Only some ulama make an exception for the hunting birds, that is, the birds of prey. If they eat from the meat they capture, they allow this. And they say that you can eat from this meat as long as it brings back most of the hunted animal. So let's say if the eagle brings you back most of the rabbit, but even if it has eaten from the rabbit, it is not a problem and you can eat it, whereas the same cannot be said about a dog. They make this difference because of the nature of the birds and dogs, because it is not necessary that the dogs will eat, because dogs are much more disciplined and they exhibit more intelligence than birds. And of course the one sending the animal out must be either a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian, and mumayyiz as well. But here it is not a condition that the attack must be on the neck, so the blood does not need to flow from the neck, rather anywhere would do, because we can be a bit more flexible when it comes to matters of hunting. Here's a question: if somebody wants to sacrifice an animal and initially he forgets to mention the name of Allah, then as he is cutting the neck and the jugular vein, he then remembers and then says Bismillah. Is this allowed to be eaten? The answer is, if he has cut the jugular veins and then he mentions the name afterwards, then this will not suffice and you're not allowed to eat the animal. If he mentions the name of Allah before he cuts the jugular vein and the blood starts to flow, so this is the cutoff point, when the blood starts to flow. So if he mentioned it before that, then it is fine and halal to be eaten. Another question: if the one sacrificing the animal doubts, did he mention the name of Allah or not? What do we say? We say you did not mention the name of Allah, Because we have to return to the asl, and the asl is you did not mention the name of Allah. So that's the default position. Okay, let's look at this first chapter about hunting with trained dogs. Many ahadith on this chapter, all speaking about the same topic and giving the same message. From Adi ibn Hatim, he says, O Messenger of Allah, I send out my trained dogs, and they catch the prey for me, and I mention the name of Allah upon them. And the Prophet said, إِذَا أَرْسَلْتَ كَلْبَكَ الْمُعَلَّمِ وَذَكَرْتَ اسْمَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ فَكُلْ. When you send out your trained dog and you mention the name of Allah upon him, then eat the meat. I said, even if the dog kills the prey? The Prophet replied, وَإِن قَتَلْنَ مَا لَمْ يَشْرَكْهَا كَلْبٌ لَيْسَ مَعَهَا. Yes, even if the dog kills the prey completely, as long as no other dog which you did not set off participates in catching this game animal. I said, and I throw my mi'rad, which is a heavy featherless arrow. And the Prophet said, إِذَا رَمَيْتَ بِالْمِعْرَاضِ فَخَزَقَ فَقُلْهُ وَإِنْ أَصَابَهُ بِعَرْضِهِ فَلَا تَأْكُلْ. If you catch the game animal with the sharp side of the spear, so it pierces the animal, then you can eat it. But if you catch it with the blunt side of the arrow, then do not eat it. We find here that Adi ibn Hatim radiallahu anh directly catches his food, so no need to go to the shop to buy food. And he's asking the Prophet ﷺ about this matter. And this is a fadila, a virtue of Adi, because he's seeking knowledge in order to implement it. So when you undertake a particular action, make sure you have knowledge about what the Sharia is saying. This is a vital lesson that we can take. These trained dogs must catch for you. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, فَكُلُوا مِمَّا أَمْسَكْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ وَذْكُرُوا اسْمَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. Eat what they catch for you and mention the name of Allah upon them. That is, when you send them out. If they eat the meat for themselves, then they have not caught it for you. They have caught it for their own selves, and hence you are not allowed to eat from such a meat. And nowadays you can hunt with guns, and this is the same thing. As you shoot, you need to mention the name of Allah, so you need to say Bismillah before you fire. If you fire and you catch the animal and it dies, and then you mention the name of Allah, that will not suffice. So note the two conditions. The dog must be trained, or any animal that you send out must be trained. What does trained mean? It means that when you call it, it comes to you. When you send it out, it goes out. And it does not go out to hunt on its own accord. So it is fully submissive and subservient to you. And the other condition is that the name of Allah is mentioned as you send them out. Is it a condition that the blood should flow as the dog hunts the game animal? The answer is no. We have to be flexible in matters like this. As long as it just hunts and kills the animal, that is good enough for you to eat. As for the condition of the blood flowing, then yes, this is definitely a condition when it comes to the nahar or the dhabh. If you are in doubt whether the dog hunted the animal or whether the dog simply found this game animal dead already, then the asl is that we take it to be that it is dead already and that the dog did not hunt it. So if it's like a 50-50 situation, then we give precedence to the haram over the halal, because that is safer. It's a similar case then when the Prophet said, وَإِن قَتَلْنَا مَا لَمْ يَشْرَكْهَا كَلْبٌ لَيْسَ مَعَهَا. Even if the dog kills the game animal, as long as another dog whom you did not set off did not participate in the hunt. Because then the question will be, who killed the game animal? Your dog, upon which you recited the name of Allah, or this other dog upon which the name of Allah was not recited? We do not know. It is a 50-50 situation. So we give precedence to the haram over the halal. We take from the hadith that knowledge has its virtues even for animals. Look at how two dogs could be the same, but one is mu'allam, it is trained, and the other one is not trained. The trained dog's catch will be halal to eat, and the untrained dog's catch is haram to eat. So look at the superiority of knowledge even amongst animals. So how much more pronounced will this superiority be amongst humans? Let us say you are firing your gun at a target, and if a bird gets in the way, and so the bullet hits the bird and dies, can you eat the meat of this bird? The answer is no. Because let us suppose even if you did mention the name of Allah, you did not intend to fire at this bird, and your deeds are by intention, and you only have what you intend. So qasd or intention is vital. Note that if you found another dog who participated in the catch along with your dog, and you know that this other dog has an owner who recited the name of Allah before sending that dog out, then in that case you are allowed to eat the meat, because whichever dog caught this prey, the catch is halal either way. Okay, here's a question. What about if somebody brings you their sacrificed meat and you do not know whether that person has mentioned the name of Allah over it or not, but all you know is that this person is a Muslim? Do you have to inquire about these matters? The answer is no, because the asl is that the slaughtered meat of a Muslim is halal and you do not need to inquire further. The same thing can be said with a Jew. As for if you know that they have not mentioned the name of Allah, then it is not allowed to be eaten. But as far as the doubt is concerned, then we go with the asl. The asl is that their slaughtered meat is halal, the Muslim and the people of the book. And we need not inquire, because if we open up the doors to inquiry, then we may as well follow it through all the way. So we'll say, the person who slaughtered, is he a Muslim, Jew or Christian? They'll say yes. But we don't need to stop there. We would ask, are all the conditions of the dhabiha met? They'll say yes, it is met. So we will ask, so that means that the blood was flowing when the neck was cut? So that's the jugular vein? They will say yes. Okay. And this meat, was it from an animal that is halal to be eaten? So for example, you cannot make a dhabiha on a pig. And they will say yes, the animal is halal to be eaten. We do not need to stop there. We will say, okay, this animal may be halal, but was this animal bought or was it usurped or stolen? Because you're not allowed to eat meat which is usurped or stolen. They will say it is bought. We need not stop there. We will say, okay, if it was bought in a transaction, were the conditions of this transaction met? And in the Kitab al-Bay' there are 7 conditions of transactions. Were they all met? They will say, yes, okay, they were all met. Okay, fine, but there are also preventative factors, such as, for example, buying and selling after the adhan of the Jumu'ah. So we will ask them, was this bought before or after the adhan of the Jumu'ah, if it was a Friday? And so on like this, it becomes stupid. This is why we need not burden ourselves. Because if you're going to burden yourself, then you may as well be consistent and burden yourself all the way through. Why bother stop at any one particular place? Go all the way through. And be consistent with your own philosophy of burdening yourself. Rather, what we find in the hadith is that Aisha asked the Prophet that there are people who bring sacrifice meat to us. They have newly converted to Islam. We do not know if they mention the name of Allah or not. The Prophet simply told us, Sammu antum wa kulu. You mention the name of Allah and eat it. So the Prophet told them to go by the asl, which is that the meat is halal, and do not inquire any further. There is a question to be asked. If you send your hunting dog out to catch a particular prey, but the dog manages to catch another prey other than the one you intended, is this prey halal to be eaten then? Well, from one angle, it appears it is halal to be eaten because you did send your dog out with the intention to hunt, and he hunted for you. But from another angle, it could be argued that he caught the wrong prey because you did not intend that prey which he caught, you intended the other one, and so the dog caught what you did not intend. So from that angle, it appears that you're not allowed to eat it. This matter can be debated, but if we have a tug-of-war type of situation with 2 opposing views pulling you in opposite directions, then you can opt for the safe option and not eat it. These ahadith in the chapter narrated by Adi ibn Hatim are extra reliable because Adi is narrating a hadith pertaining to his occupation, and the one who does that is going to remember this type of hadith a lot more effectively because it pertains to his occupation. He's going to have a vested interest in this particular hadith, as opposed to any other hadith which does not pertain to his occupation. It is a similar case about the hadith which has passed by us. مَنِ اقْتَنَى كَلْبًا إِلَّا كَلْبَ صَيْدٍ أَوْ مَاشِيَةٍ. Whoever takes for a pet a dog except the hunting dog or a sheep dog, then a qirat of his reward will be removed every day. Ibn Umar narrated this, and Ibn Umar was told that Abu Hurairah also said, أَوْ كَلْبَ حَرْثٍ, or the dog to guard the fields. And Ibn Umar says, yes, Abu Hurairah has remembered this because Abu Hurairah himself has a field which he looks after. So that is to say, of course, Abu Hurairah is going to remember these matters because it pertains to his own occupation. We also find a difference in these narrations. About the spear or the arrow which you hunt with, if it pierces and makes the blood flow from any part of the body, then you're allowed to eat it, as the Prophet said, إِذَا رَمَيْتَ بِالْمِعْرَاضِ فَإِنْ خَزَقَهُ فَكُلْ. If it pierces the skin and makes the blood flow, then eat it. وَإِنْ أَصَابَهُ بِعَرْضِهِ فَلَا تَأْكُلْ. But if it kills the animal with the blunt side, then do not eat it, because that will be the same as if you just bludgeoned the animal to death, and it would not be halal. Whereas, if you send out your hunting dog, and it kills the animal without piercing the animal and making the blood flow, it is still halal to be eaten. So notice the difference, and that there is more flexibility when the hunting animal kills the prey. However it kills the prey is good enough. Whereas the same thing cannot be said when you use your weapons to hunt, be it a spear or even nowadays a gun. It has to pierce the animal and make the blood flow. In another narration we find the Prophet saying, وَإِنْ رَمَيْتَ بِسَحْمِكَ فَاذْكُرِ اسْمَ اللَّهِ. If you throw your arrow, then mention the name of Allah. فَإِنْ غَابَ عَنْكَ يَوْمًا فَلَمْ تَجِدْ فِيهِ إِلَّا أَثَرَ سَهْمِكَ فَكُلْ إِنْ شِئْتَ وَإِنْ وَجَدْتَهُ غَرِيقًا فِي الْمَاءِ فَلَا تَأْكُلْ. If you throw your arrow, then mention the name of Allah, and if it disappears from you for one day, then you find it dead and only the signs of your arrow on the animal, then eat this animal if you want to, because then we can be pretty sure that it was your arrow which killed the animal. And the Prophet said, but if you found it drowned in water, then do not eat it, because it is probable that it died because of drowning and not because of your arrow. The question that we need to ask ourselves is, what killed it? If it is the drowning which killed it, you do not eat it. If it is your arrow which killed it, and thereafter it fell into the water, already dead, then you can eat it. This is what the ruling revolves around. What actually killed it? It's a similar case where if an animal falls off a high place, let's say you hunt it, and then it runs away with its injury, and you found it fallen off a high place. Now, what killed it? The fall or your shot? We have to go by the ghalabatul dhann, what is predominant in our thoughts, by investigating the animal. Also in the chapter from Abu Tha'laba al-Khushani radiyallahu anhu, he asked the Prophet, إِنَّا بِأَرْضِ قَوْمٍ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ نَأْكُلُ فِي آنِيَتِهِمْ وَأَرْضِ صَيْدٍ أَصِيدُ بِقَوْسِي وَبِكَلْبِي الْمُعَلَّمِ وبكلبي الذي ليس بمعلم فأخبرني ما الذي يحل لنا من ذلك. We are living amongst the people of the book. We eat from their utensils, and we are also in a place where we hunt. I hunt with my bow and arrow, and I also hunt with my trained dog, and also the dog which is not trained. So tell me, what is halal from all of this? The Prophet replied, أما ما ذكرت أنكم بأرض قوم من أهل الكتاب تأكلون في آنيتهم فإن وجدتم غير آنيتهم فلا تأكلوا فيها وإن لم تجدوا فاغسلوها ثم كلوا فيها. As for what you mentioned, that you are in the land of the people of the book, you eat from their utensils, then if you find other than their utensils, so utensils of the Muslims, then do not eat from their utensils. But if you do not find other than that, then wash it first and then eat from it. وأما ما ذكرت أنك بأرض صيد فما أصبت بقوسك فاذكر اسم الله ثم كل وما أصبت بكلبك المعلم فاذكر اسم الله ثم كل وما أصبت بكلبك الذي ليس بمعلم فأدركت ذكاته فكل. As for you mentioning that you are in a land where you hunt, then if you hunt with your arrow and you mention the name of Allah, then eat it. And what you hunt with your trained dog, mention the name of Allah and eat. And what you hunt with your untrained dog, but you are able to catch the prey such that you can yourself sacrifice it, then eat it. So a few masail in this hadith. So as for the utensils of the people of the book, you can eat from it upon two conditions as mentioned in the hadith. Firstly, that you do not find utensils of the Muslims. And then secondly, if you are going to eat from their utensils, that you must wash it first. The problem with this hadith, on its apparent meaning, is that Allah Jalla wa Ala has allowed for us to eat the meat of the people of the book, that is the sacrificed meat. So it should be even more allowed for us to use their utensils to eat our meat on it. So why is the Prophet giving these conditions? That do not eat from it if you can find the utensils of the Muslims, but if you have to eat from their utensils, then wash it first. And we know that the asl of utensils is that they are tahir, unless you can prove that they are najis. Now the way around this would be to say that those people of the book may have been eating meat of the pig or any other type of najasa and not taking care to clean their utensils from the najasa. And this is why the Prophet has ordered these utensils to be cleaned, because we have reasons to believe, in this particular case of Abu Tha'laba, that they did not wash their utensils from najasa. Otherwise, let it be known that the asl is that utensils are tahir. That if a non-Muslim gives you his utensils, then it is tahir, as long as you know that he has washed it. We take from the hadith that if you hunt with your untrained dog and he hunts for you, then if he has killed the animal, then it is not allowed to be eaten. But if he has incapacitated the animal and you yourself carry out the slaughter, then it is halal to be eaten. So that is the difference between the trained dog and the untrained dog. We also take the virtue of Abu Tha'laba in that he wants to gain knowledge about the actions he is performing. Knowledge to implement, of course. Also, let it be noted that it is not advisable to borrow things from the people of the book, be it utensils or other than that, because this will make your heart attached to them, and you do not want that. Not with the people of kufr. Rather, your heart needs to be attached to the people of righteousness and taqwa of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Let's move to the next chapter. If the game animal goes out of sight but is later found. From Abu Tha'laba, the Prophet said, إِذَا رَمَيْتَ بِسَحْمِكَ فَغَابَ عَنْكَ فَأَدْرَكْتَهُ فَقُلْهُ مَا لَمْ يُنْدِنْ. If you throw your arrow and the animal disappears, then afterwards you catch it and it is dead, then you can eat from it as long as it has not gone rotten. And this makes sense because if it is rotten, then the meat is harmful. And you're not allowed to eat that which is harmful, even if you did hunt it correctly. And so this hadith needs to be joined onto what we mentioned previously, that if it disappears from you for a day and you only find the marks of your arrow on it, then you can eat it if you want to. But if you found it drowned, then you're not allowed to eat it. We'll say yes, if you find it later on, with only the marks of your arrow, then you can eat if you want to, but as long as it has not gone rotten. The next chapter, about the prohibition of fanged beasts and birds of prey. From Ibn Abbas, نهى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن كل ذي ناب من السباع وعن كل ذي مخلب من الطير. The Prophet forbade every fanged beast and every bird of prey with talons. So note that when it comes to these fangs, it must use these fangs to hunt, not just any animal with fangs. Likewise with talons, it must use these talons to hunt with, not just any bird with talons, otherwise we would have to say chickens are haram, because they are birds with talons. And in this hadith there is a ruling which you do not find in the Quran, so it is a new ruling in that respect. The next chapter, about the dead fish in the sea, that is, those fish which have died naturally. A long narration here from Jabir ibn Abdullah. He reports that the Prophet sent out an army detachment with Abu Ubaidah as the chief, so that we could intercept a caravan of the Quraysh. He provided us with a bag of dates, and he did not have anything else to give us. He gave us one date for each day. One of the narrators, Abu Zubayr, said, "What did you do with the date?" Jabir says, "We sucked it just as a baby sucks, and then we drank water over that, and it would suffice us for a day until the night." He says, "We also beat off leaves with the help of our staffs. We drenched them with water and ate them." He says, "We then went to the coast of the sea, and there rose before us something like a big mound. We came near it, and we found that it was a whale." Abu Ubaidah said, "It is dead." He then said, "No, but it does not matter. We have been sent by the Messenger of Allah in the path of Allah, and you people are hard-pressed because of the scarcity of food, so you may eat it." He says, "We were 300 in number, and stayed there for a month eating this until we grew bulky." Jabir says, "I saw how we extracted pitcher after pitcher full of fat from the cavity of its eye, and sliced from it a compact piece of meat, equal to that of a bull or like a bull." Abu Ubaidah called 13 men and made them sit in the cavity of its eye, and he took hold of one of the ribs of its chest and made it stand, and then saddled the biggest of the camels we had with us, and it passed under the arched rib, and we provided ourselves with pieces of boiled meat for use in the journey. When we came back to Al-Madinah, we mentioned this to the Prophet, whereupon the Prophet said, "Huwa rizqun akhrajahu Allahu lakum." This is provision which Allah brought forth for you. فَهَلْ مَعَكُم مِّن لَحْمِهِ شَيْءٌ فَتُطْعِمُونَ. Do you have some of this meat left over so that you may feed us? Jabir says, so we sent some of this meat to the Prophet. We find from this hadith what the Quran teaches us. أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ صَيْدُ الْبَحْرِ وَطَعَامُهُ مَتَاعًا لَكُمْ وَلِلسَّيَّارَةِ. Made halal for you are the hunted animals of the sea and its food. Its food means the dead animals, as explained by Ibn Abbas. Just like in this narration, the dead whale. Likewise in the Sunan, هُوَ الطَّهُورُ مَاؤُهُ الْحِلُّ مَيْتَتُهُ. The seawater, it is purifying. You can use it for wudu, and its dead are halal. And this is from the ease of the Sharia, because for you to catch the fish and then to slaughter it is difficult, because it is not a land animal. As for if the fish comes out of the water, then it will die. And as for going into the water, like a deep sea diver, and then sacrificing the fish is unnecessarily difficult. And note what we mean by sea creatures, creatures that only live in the water, such as whales and sharks. As for those creatures that live in the water and land, such as crocodiles and turtles and crabs and so on, then they are given the ruling of land creatures. First of all, let it be known that some people may criticize the authenticity of this hadith because Abu Zubayr is narrating from Jabir, and Abu Zubayr is known as a mudallis, and he has made an'ana in this narration. So he has not clearly explicitly stated that he heard from Jabir. However, it is known that the an'ana in the Sahihain is to be accepted as opposed to anything out of the Sahihain, because the an'ana in the Sahihain is taken to be muttasil, or joined on, so that the isnad is continuous. And this is what is well known amongst the hadith scholars. As far as the text of this hadith or the matan is concerned, then we find Abu Ubaidah, who is Amir ibn al-Jarrah, the Amin of this ummah, the trustworthy man of this ummah, was appointed as a leader over this Sariyah. In fact, when Umar radiallahu anhu was on his deathbed as the Khalifa, he said that if Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah was alive, I would make him into the Khalifa, because the Prophet called Abu Ubaidah the Amin of this ummah, the trustworthy person of this ummah. And so, of course, the Khalifa needs to be somebody who is trustworthy. The Prophet himself was given this title before his prophethood by his people, Al-Amin, the trustworthy. We can take from the hadith the difficult life that the Sahaba were leading, because here we find they are sucking just on one date like a child sucks, and this would suffice them for a whole day. It's difficult to imagine this nowadays, and especially add to the fact that they are on a journey, which makes it even more difficult, and they would be eating leaves. Again, difficult to imagine that sort of thing happening nowadays, but Allah Jalla wa Ala has kept them firm, because they are striving in the way of Allah, and whoever helps Allah's cause, then Allah Jalla wa Ala helps him. And when the going gets tough and it reaches its fever pitch, there comes the help of Allah Jalla wa Ala. And look how Allah has raised the whole whale up for them. From the biggest of living creatures is the whale. Now Abu Ubaidah said that it is dead, but we are forced to eat it because of the scarcity of the food. When you eat dead meat, is it harmful? Because normally dead meat is haram because it is harmful. The blood has not been drained out and it has impurities. But if you are forced to eat dead meat, then it will not be harmful, because if Allah Jalla wa Ala allows it, then it will not be harmful to you. And besides that, if you are extremely hungry and almost going to die out of hunger, and you are forced to eat this meat, then it may be the case that you will digest this food a whole lot quicker. And if you do that, then the food's harmful effect will not have a chance to take effect. If you are forced to eat haram meat, dead meat or pig or something other than that, then do you just eat enough to keep you alive, or can you fill your belly with it? Well, we say eat enough just to keep you alive, because it is darura, and darura must only be taken up as much as is necessary. If you feel that you may need it as well later on, then carry the rest with you. We find here that just with one whale, there were 300 of them, and they stayed for 1 month eating from its meat until they became bulky and fat. One whale sufficing 300 people for 1 month. Behold the blessing of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Why would they stay for 1 month if they were after the trade caravan from the Quraysh? Is this length of time not excessive? Well, it does seem excessive, but we do not know why they stayed for a month. There would have been some sort of reason or another. He says, until we became fat. Just look at how the situation turns around. Just a moment ago they were sucking on dates, and that would suffice them for the whole day, and now they are becoming fat. The meat of the fish ought to be eaten, at least if ayah number 14 of Surah An-Nahl is anything to go by. وَهُوَ الَّذِي سَخَّرَ الْبَحْرَ لِتَأْكُلُوا مِنْهُ لَحْمًا طَرِيًّا وَتَسْتَخْرِجُونَ مِنْهُ حِلْيَةً تَلْبَسُونَهَا وَتَرَى الْفُلْكَ مَوَاخِرَ فِيهِ وَلِتَبْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِهِ وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. He is the one who has subjected the sea to you, that you may eat thereof fresh tender meat, that is, of the fish. We find then that Allah Jalla wa Ala speaks highly of fish, yet people nowadays are more infatuated with chicken. And not that it is haram, it is halal to eat chicken, only it is not mentioned in the Quran in the same way fish is. We find that Abu Ubaidah tells 13 men just to sit in the waqab, which is the cavity of the eye. This story really just gets amazing and amazing. 13 men sitting in the cavity of an eye? This must be a huge whale. Thereafter, Abu Ubaidah took its rib and made it stand up, and the biggest camel that they had was able to pass under the arched rib. So what's happening is that this one piece of rib, he has erected it as if it is an arch, and the biggest camel can pass underneath it. Like we say, this story gets amazing and amazing. It seems to us that there must have been brought forth for them a huge whale. The Prophet ﷺ told them this was a rizq that Allah has brought forth for them. So it is as if Allah Jalla wa Ala has honoured these Sahaba with this gigantic present. The Prophet requested some meat from them, not because he was needy, but because if the Prophet eats from this as well, then this will put the hearts of the companions at rest that this is halal. It is similar to when some of the companions did a ruqya on one of the chief of the tribes with al-Fatiha, and they gave them a payment of a sheep, and the Prophet said, "Kulu wadribu li ma'akum bisaham." Eat from it, but also spare a piece for me. And this is teaching people through actions that this meat is halal. And this would be far more effective than simply verbally saying it is halal. We also have a third example, along with the first example of the whale and the second example of the sheep, when the companions were fasting on a journey and they became desperate and it was hard for them to fast on this journey. The Prophet held up a cup of milk and began to drink it in front of the people to show them it is halal to break the fast. He could have just said you are allowed to break the fast. However, performing the action yourself, it speaks louder than words. Also in that hadith about the cup of milk, he was told that some people have continued on fasting, and he said, أُولَٰئِكَ الْعُصَىٰ أُولَٰئِكَ الْعُصَىٰ. They are the disobedient ones, they are the disobedient ones. We have an example from Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, when the Tatar were invading their land and they were fighting back. It was Ramadan. The ulama said, well, you people are neither travelers nor are you ill, therefore you are not allowed to break your fast. Ibn Taymiyyah said, no, it does not matter whether you are traveling or not, whether you're ill or not. The fact is you're allowed to break your fast to give yourself strength in a jihad situation. And he went in front of the army eating some pieces of bread during the daytime of Ramadan. The fact is you are allowed to break your fast in a jihad situation, even if you are not traveling nor ill, in order to give yourself strength to fight. This is what the Prophet told his companions when they were set off to conquer Mecca. He told them to break your fast, make fitr, because the fitr would be better for your strength. So that is the illah, the justification which he gave. It will be better for your strength, not because you're on a journey, not because you are ill, no, but because you need to strengthen yourself. You see, on balance, to break the fast is negative, but to strengthen yourself against the enemy is positive, and the positive outweighs the negative. Also from other narrations in the chapter, we find that they remained half a month, and in another narration, 12 days. These conflicts in number does not harm us, and it does not harm the narration. Even though there is ittirab from that sense, the ittirab in the hadith only matters if it is going to change the ruling of the hadith. As for if it is just some side information which doesn't actually change any ruling from the hadith, it is just some superfluous information which the hadith can still do without, then this does not harm if there is any inerrancy in these numbers or information. Let's take the next chapter. about the meat of the donkey. Ali ibn Abi Talib says that on the day of Khaybar, the Prophet forbade the mut'ah marriage and the meat of donkeys. Also in the chapter from Salama ibn al-Aqwa', he says, we went to Khaybar with the Prophet and we conquered it. Allah granted us victory. On that evening, they lit many fires. And the Prophet said, مَا هَذِهِ النِّيرَانِ عَلَى أَيِّ شَيْءٍ تُوقِدُونَ. What are these fires and what are you kindling these fires for? They said, عَلَى لَحْمٍ, we're cooking meat. The Prophet said, عَلَى أَيِّ لَحْمٍ, which meat? They said, عَلَى لَحْمِ حُمُرٍ إِنسِيَّةٍ, donkey meat. Then the Prophet said, أَهْرِقُوهَا وَاكْسِرُوهَا, pour these pots and all the contents and break them. That is, break the pots. And a man said, Ya Rasulullah, أَوْ نُهْرِقُهَا وَنَغْسِلُهَا, or perhaps we will pour over the contents of the pot, but just wash the pots instead. And the Prophet said, أَوْ ذَاك, or you can do that. First, notice the difference between humur insiya, or we could say humur ahliya, which are the domestic asses, that is the donkey, and the humur wahshiya, the wild asses, which is the zebra. The zebra meat is halal to be eaten. Donkey meat is not. Just like the pig, it is najis. We find from the narration the praiseworthy obedience of the Sahaba. They were hungry, they were cooking meat. The last thing you want is to pour out the contents of the pot when you are hungry and you want to eat meat. The average man would not obey this type of command, but the Sahaba did. So they would give precedence to the command of the Prophet over the command of their stomachs to eat. It is similar to how they poured over the khamr in their containers. They poured it out onto the streets when it was declared that khamr is haram. They simply do not ask any questions, we hear and we obey. That is the philosophy of the Muslim. As long as the command comes from an authentic source, be it the Quran or an authentic hadith. They did not even ask, is this order denoting an obligation or recommendation? They did not even ask such a thing, they simply obeyed the command. Such a question can be asked if we have a conflict situation, because if an act is haram and you fall into it, then you have to make tawbah, otherwise you do not. And you can also talk about these rulings in circles of knowledge to enhance your understanding. But when it comes to practical everyday life, then we hear and we obey. Whether it is an obligation or a recommendation, as long as you know it is an order from the Prophet, this is good enough. We also take that Allah Jalla wa Ala can decide whatever He wants whenever He wants. We find that they were cooking this meat in the pot in the evening, so that means in the morning the donkey meat was halal. Yet in the evening it was declared haram. And this is just like khamr. In the beginning, khamr was halal. The Quran acknowledges people drinking khamr and did not forbid them at the beginning. Later on, it became haram. So the matter is in the hands of Allah Jalla wa Ala, whether it be a universal affair or a shara'i affair. Why is it haram, this donkey meat? Because the Prophet told Abu Talha to go out and announce to the people, إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ يَنْهَيَانِكُمْ عَنْ لُحُومِ الْحُمُرِ الْأَهْلِيَّةِ فَإِنَّهَا رِجْسٌ. Allah and the Messenger forbid you from donkey meat because it is rijis, that is, it is najis, impure. So it is not made haram because the donkeys should be used to ride, and if we start to eat them then there will be less rides available for the people, or any other reason. Note here that using donkeys, so riding on them and using them to carry loads, and even buying and selling donkeys is halal. Because the usage is halal, so buying and selling them is halal. What is haram is to eat their meat. So if you slaughter a donkey, it is haram for you to sell it meat, for somebody to eat it. But what if we have a non-Muslim who eats donkey meat? Can we sell him this donkey meat to eat? Because it may be halal in his religion? The answer is no. As long as it is haram in the Sharia, it is not permissible to sell such an item. Because remember, the laws of the Sharia do apply to the kuffar. It's just that we do not enforce it on them or demand that they follow the Sharia until they first embrace Islam. So this is our request from the kuffar, that they embrace Islam before anything else. Otherwise, the laws of the Sharia do apply to them, and this becomes known by the fact that they will be punished for not obeying the ahkam of the Sharia. That is, in terms of the prohibition of drinking wine, of gambling, of zina, of eating pork, and so on. All of these prohibitions apply to the kuffar. but we do not demand it from them as of yet until they first embrace Islam. So this is our request, to embrace Islam first. So selling pork or even donkey meat is not allowed to anyone, regardless of their deen, even if it is allowed in their deen. The same thing with khamr as well. It is allowed in the deen of the Jews and Christians, but we are not allowed to sell it to them, as this is aiding them in sin and transgression. Note also, in the first narration, he says that the Prophet forbade the mut'a marriage in Khaybar. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah disputes this. He says, no, this is a mistake from one of the narrators. Rather, the Prophet forbade the mut'a marriage in the year of the conquest of Mecca. Rather, on Khaybar, he only forbade the donkey meat. However, what is apparent is that the narration does mention Yawm Khaybar, mut'a was made haram, and also on the Aam al-Fath, so that the naskh took place twice. But practically speaking, it does not matter to us. The bottom line is that mut'a is haram, and that contract is invalid. The next chapter, about horse meat. Jabir reports that on the day of Khaybar, the Prophet forbade the meat of the donkey and he permitted the meat of horses. We also know that a horse was sacrificed during the time of the Prophet and the meat was eaten. And if it had been haram, the Quran would have mentioned it. Even if the Prophet did not know about it, the Quran would have mentioned it. But this narration is completely explicit and clear that the horse meat is allowed, and zebra meat likewise. The donkey meat is haram. What about the meat of the mule, which is a cross between a horse and a donkey? We say that in a 50-50 situation like this, we give precedence to that which is haram, because that is safer. The Quran mentions وَالْخَيْلَ وَالْبِغَالَ وَالْحَمِيرَ لِتَرْكَبُوهَا وَزِينَةً, and horses and mules and donkeys for you to ride on and as adornment. So some scholars would say that these animals are there to ride on, so therefore you're not allowed to eat them. But there is no evidence in the ayah that you're not allowed to eat this meat. The ayah is saying that these animals are for riding, but the ayah does not say that they are only for riding. Rather, there can be other uses as well, but the main uses for horses and for donkeys and for mules is riding, that's for sure. But the ayah does not say you're not allowed to eat them, whereas this narration says you're allowed to eat them. And the rule of usul al-fiqh is that the muthbit takes precedence over the nafi. The muthbit is that which affirms a ruling. The nafi is that which does not affirm a ruling. And you give precedence to that which affirms the ruling. Why? Because it gives you an increase in knowledge. And this is a good example of a muthbit and nafi. It is also worth pointing out that we have an ishkal, something unclear, about the narration of Jabir and that big fish that they ate from. It says they ate for a month. Another narration says half a month. And like we said, it does not actually matter because it does not have a bearing on the rulings of the hadith. However, even if it was half a month, does meat not become rotten during that time, especially in the heat of the Arabian desert? If the answer is yes, then did we not take a narration where the Prophet said, if you hunt the animal with your arrow and it disappears from you, then you find it, then you may eat from it as long as it has not become rotten. And so eating rotten meat is haram. We find from the narration of Jabir, however, that the Prophet is eating from this meat. So is the Prophet eating rotten meat? This is the question. The answer is that it is possible that the companions preserved the meat by putting salt on it or some other way. After all, this meat had to have lasted them half a month or a month, so you need to preserve it somehow. So if we assume that they preserved it, then there is no ishkal. Okay, let's take some review questions at this stage. So question number 1. What are the conditions of a valid slaughter? Question number 2. What do we mean by a trained hunting animal? Question number 3. What is the ruling on eating amphibians? Are they treated like water animals such that the dead meat can be eaten or not? Explain your answer.